bang and bazing zang. We got Peter Hahn, ladies and gentlemen.
What's going on, guys?
Now, I'm sure there's a thunderous applause from thousands of people behind their keyboards. Peter, how are you, man? Thank you for joining us.
No, thanks for having me here. It's awesome to be a part of this great, amazing collection of artists to be a part of this entire, what is it, month now you guys going?
Yeah, every
wow,
Tuesday,
crazy.
Thursday, this until November 20th.
An awesome opportunity. But yeah, thank you.
Well,
That's great.
ladies and gentlemen, if you do not know Peter, do yourself a favor and check out his Instagram. Peter is an incredible illustrator. He's got tons of books out there. He's also one of the most gifted teachers. I've been fortunate enough to be in one of your classes, and where you teach all sorts of things, and we're gonna dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
But you teach at Art Center. You've taught at Brainstorm, CGMA.
Concept Design Academy. I've dabbled in education all over Los Angeles and internationally. But yeah, my main school primary is Art Center with Brainstorm, CDA combination together. So 3 terms in a year, so I'm teaching year-round, every single day with small little breaks in between. But still, I'm constantly on.
That's amazing.
So great.
I mean, we met you in Poland at Promised Land, which is this amazing festival that's thrown by the CD Projekt Red artists.
Shout outs to Pavel and Seb and all of our dear friends over there, man. They made just the most fun, wonderful festival where we got to see
to meet Peter, and Peter just came out on stage and gave everyone a run for their money. They were just like, what is going on? It was just like full of just energy and excitement and like showing, like going back to like how to actually draw shapes, which
Pretty much.
so many people take for granted today, and so many people get caught up in the technology, and then you brought this kind of refreshing, like, oh yeah, that's what it's all about.
Right.
You know, and this is actually where it was at Promised Land where we had the thought of doing more of drawing on this show, because originally we were thinking we were just going to do 3D stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But we were in this auditorium with Peter, and 500 people completely silent for hours. While everyone had their notepads out and we're drawing along with you, and it was just a captivating experience.
But it's very true. Stuff like this is so easily looked over nowadays because so much more technology is available, and students need to learn so much more too. So fundamentals are always going to be there, but they touch it and then they kind of move on and they're like, okay, I got to handle all this other stuff, not really realizing the long-term effects of not having enough strong fundamentals. So now that this has kind of come back, but what's also happening is that there's been this resurgence of drawing and sketching where these notable artists and people that are even 10 times better than I am are just going out there and just demolishing people. But kids are seeing this and be like, I want to now be able to do that. So drawing has kind of come back again in a lot of ways. But it's the combination now, also the 3D and 2D stuff in marriage together in more harmony.
Yeah, totally. And so now you're going to be drawing on a Cintiq, and I don't know how much of our audience has ever seen one of these or used one of these. Can you explain like what a Cintiq is?
Yeah, a Cintiq is essentially your monitor, but also your direct bridge and connector to your canvas. So you're able to draw on top of the monitor to be able to get the effects of lines and shapes that you want to, as if you're drawing on a piece of paper. Of course, the benefit of being able to work digital with Photoshop or whatever program you like to get into, even 3D to 2D. So it's definitely a great hardware to be able to transition from 2D analog to be able to go to 3D or even digital tool sets, because the muscle memories can be very much relatable. So that's definitely the benefit of having a Cintiq. Obviously, this is a much larger size. I don't know what size this one is. I use a 27-inch, but I think this one would be bigger.
This is a 27.
I think I go 24. I have a 24, I'm sorry. But it's the touch version as well, too. I have a keyboard in front of me, which I will use actually very minimally. A couple of small things here and there. The stylus, obviously, to draw with. But yeah, this is pretty much as if it was drawing on my sketchpad.
Awesome. And we're going to be able to see your screen on the Twitch channel as well.
Okay,
so
great.
there we go.
Perfect.
One thing I want to mention too is this is a huge piece of hardware and a substantial investment.
Yeah.
But you can get with an iPad and Procreate software, and shout outs to our good buddies at Procreate. They're unbelievable. And an Apple Pen. You can be doing many, if not almost everything that you're going to be doing tonight.
There are definitely a lot of different options, and that's also one of the harder parts too, is that there's so many options. You're not really quite sure which ones to go for, but thankfully, because of social media, there are many artists that share their impressions, reviews, ideas behind whatever they use. So research heavily as much as possible.
This is something you do as well, right?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so on your YouTube channel, is that
YouTube
it?
channels, I'll share it on my Instagram as well too, Facebook. I just kind of play with things, give my thoughts, impressions, and ideas. I'm not saying which one's better or worse, but more just the experience behind them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. Well, what are you going to show us today?
Well, I kind of want to start with a demo process. So it's about, I don't know how much, we have about an hour, right?
Yeah, we got
so,
a little more than an hour.
hopefully I can maybe compact in as much as possible, because what we had together in Poland was 3-hour sessions. We have maybe less than an hour, so I'm going to try to give you a shotgun blast of all this information. But I'm going to try to compose this in a way that's going to be a little bit more interesting, something I've actually never even done. So I'm going to try something new with you guys right now. And
Amazing.
And here's the thing, I might fail at
Exclusive.
this thing, okay? So if I bomb at this, I apologize greatly. But the thing is, I like being in that kind of position. I like being in positions where, like, I don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, but I am going to problem solve as best I can right now with you.
Awesome.
I just want to point out too that I think that is one of the coolest traits.
Yeah.
The willingness to have the courage to take risks and to be at your level to get up in front of thousands of people here with us and say I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna try something wholly new and take a big risk. I think that's the coolest thing you could do.
Cool. Well, the content is something I'm very familiar with also. It's information based on classes I've taught for more than 8 years. But essentially it starts with everything when it comes to a line. So I'm going to just use a line, and we just draw it diagonally, straight, horizontally. I'm going to repeat some of these lines also. Now, a line doesn't really seem like much at the moment, but things take evolution. We're looking for relationships, essentially. And by the way, if you guys have any questions or want to mention some stuff, please do. I can do this while I'm talking.
And we'll
as well.
read some questions from the chat as you go.
I don't mind that either. So if you guys have questions out there, please shout out a couple things. Right now, I'm just drawing some simple lines for you at the moment, and this doesn't seem like anything, but we have to think about how this will affect long-term wise. And these are the fundamentals, the basics of just being able to draw. Right now, we're just creating a line, but we need to build the muscle memory behind it. My first recommendation is use pens to build confidence. Right now, when people are drawing as students, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear at younger ages, coming out of high school, even going to the college level, a lot of burden. So we're just going to build the confidence of line work, and what I'm going to do is just show you guys. Right now I've done some slants and lines and horizontals and verticals, but as nice as they might look, eventually over time we're going to build more muscle memory exercise. And what we're going to be doing is, if I have a horizontal line, vertical lines, I'm going to go over these lines several times over to build them. And much like way back in history, you're talking about things like caveman drawings, Egyptian hieroglyphs. They're all just symbols and shapes that represent things that we have around us in the real world. So right now what I'm doing is building the tool sets, building the skills to be able to eventually move into something that can express and communicate story, shapes, designs. So this is just kind of, obviously random directions and movements. But as we go into a line, we can start to then manipulate that line. We can start to curve things around. We can start to spiral the line a little bit too. And again, I want to build muscle memory, so I'm going to start to go over those lines several times over just to build a strong sense of line control. But also what's going to happen is I'm starting to build a good sense of line weight, being able to control thin lines, thick lines, and be able to incorporate those for showing aesthetics, focuses, refinements. So from straight lines, we've gone to curves, we've gone to spirals, we've gone to different motions and the movements of a line. So things are starting to evolve. From line combinations, what happens, what do we have in our own culture? We have written words, a written language, right? So we're just using combinations of lines to create a verbal mixture right there. So it comes from different cultures, different backgrounds, whatever the case is. And even if you look at things like, Chinese language and stuff like that, if you look at even just symbols can represent water or mountains or whatever the case is. So from these symbols of lines, what has happened then is that we've expressed shapes.
Really quick, before we get to shapes, let me get a question in here.
Of course.
Boombop92 says, question for Peter. Do you make all of your lines from the shoulder, or do you use your wrist as well? Your line quality is amazing.
And I get that question a lot. Here's the actual answer for that. When I'm drawing, my platform, my wrist is my anchor point. Okay, so as I'm drawing, my wrist is my anchor point. My elbow is usually lifted, and I'm drawing and sliding along my wrist. Okay, so as I'm drawing and sliding along my wrist, this then gives me the judgment of distance from the paper to my hand. So I'm able to control pressure, line weight from that. I'm moving from the shoulder and the elbow. With the smaller line, I'm using finger movements. Longer lines, my elbow and shoulder are moving. But the wrist is connected always to the paper. That helps me control the movement, distance, and pressure. So that's essentially my approach towards that. So as we have then shape, we then evolved into a sense of 3 dimensions. As we have shapes that are 3-dimensional, from these 3 flat 2-dimensional shapes, we can get a cube. We can then get things like cylinders. We can get cones. We can get pyramids. And we can also obviously have the sphere. Let me know if that line is a bit shaky. I've been trying to experiment with different brushes and whatnot, but if this one is not as nice, let me just switch it over to a more solid hard brush. And I don't really use too many crazy custom brushes, but this might be a little bit crisper. So now we have 2D to 3-dimensional shapes. What's going to happen from here is that we start thinking about how we can combine these shapes together to represent things that we might see in real life, but we want to be able to experiment of how we can then interlock, overlap, and manipulate these forms. It starts very basic like this. We're looking for then relationship. We are evolving right now, line to movement, 2D to 3D. From 3D, we start to play with relationships, how one form could be just sitting right next to another form, which now gives us a sense of space, depth, relationship. Of course, even in drawing, the history of drawing, we see a lot of the caveman drawings as being flat, hieroglyphics being flat, but from that, there is a renaissance and we start to get a sense of perspective, space. We're using a 2-dimensional plane, but I can optically give you information that feels 3-dimensional. Now these are just a bunch of boxes. I can take it back a little bit further. We can add things like cones, we can add things like pyramids. But again, they're related because they're sitting on the same ground plane within the same space. That's one relationship that I can give to these forms. I can even start to take it back in space, start to give a sense that there's a scale change, right? We're going back now, back. But from there, that's just one relationship. From that overlapping, you can also then connect them together, interlock them in pieces. If I have one cube and I overlap another cube right on top of each other, we're then going to show a connection. Now, as you guys are watching this, I'm not expecting you to all of a sudden just be able to understand everything. Obviously, you can try to attempt them as I am doing them now too. Speed really isn't the issue. It's about the understanding and the accuracy. So as I'm drawing through this as quickly as possible, again, take the time to understand the concepts and the ideas behind them. Then from there, the speed will come. And I do have an answer to speed, which I will cover in a bit.
This is going to be one of those videos that like, it's going to go up on our YouTube channel after the festival, but this is one of those ones I feel like I'm going to go back and rewatch and reference over and over and over again.
And I just want to add, you know,
Yeah.
the first time we ever had dinner with Peter, we were in a big group, and I came and sat down at the table, and Peter was there drawing at the table while communicating with everyone, and does that consistently. I've almost never seen him not drawing. And so I think, you know, watching him go at this speed can be perhaps a little bit demoralizing, but know that it comes from tons and tons of reps and pure passion. So if you have those kinds of things, know that, you know, the best of them, like Bobby was saying too, you gotta find your stride and work your way through it.
Absolutely.
And before designing giant crazy spaceships and things like that, understanding how to draw primitive shapes and understanding why to even use those shapes, and before you can draw those shapes, to get comfortable with your line.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are the building blocks. It's really starting from the true foundation of like drawing a single line. Honestly, these are the building blocks and what you start with one step at a time to work up to doing the types of work we've seen from Emmanuel Shu and George Hull last week, or Tuesday, and the kind of stuff you see from Bobby and Peter if you look at their websites and on their Instagrams.
The first thing Peter said was, let's talk about muscle memory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's everything. It's the constant effort to go in there and reproduce over and over again. Repetition is in everything. So how many times have I drawn these lines and shapes? Thousands upon thousands of times. Countless hours repeating this to students and for myself to get to the point where it is just a muscle memory where you can express it without thinking it. As soon as you think and you overthink, you then hesitate and you then mess up. So the idea is to become so familiar with your subject matter, you're able to express it without having any stopping moments. That then also results back to speed. How do you get speed? Being 100% familiar with whatever you're creating. I've drawn horses and dinosaurs and cats and reptiles and snakes thousands upon thousands of times, so I don't have to think about what those things look like, but I also show you the key to get to memory built up for those things, because you can say, well, I don't know how to draw a horse, I don't know how to draw a snake, I have to have those references. Well, I'll show you real quickly how those can build. From this overlap to interlock, what we're going to be getting is then manipulation. Because from these basic primitives of a cube, cylinder, cone, whatnot, sometimes when you combine them together, they don't really represent things that we see very well. They're limiting shapes. So I want to be able to manipulate these forms also. Think of them as like soft, forms of clay. So we'll start with the first one, just a sphere first, an organic rounded shape. And again, like evolution, things are going to start to evolve, almost like become like microbes or bacteria. And through those, they'll evolve into more complex shapes in time as they start to build. I might get a shape then that might also pull in different directions. I'm stretching it, right? Like kind of like a bean-like shape. I might even get a form that has a bit of a push into it. So I'm squeezing it and I'm compressing that shape. I can then also continue to really elongate and push and pull in different directions and get shapes that are a bit more complex. I can keep pushing it even further and get many more complex shapes. Now, from these bacterial forms and microbes can germinate into things like little plants and buds and whatnot. And you can even look at things of plant forms that represent well with what we're going to do next. Even things like a piece of bamboo or some kind of plant structure. Because right now what we have as organic shape manipulated forms are flat shapes. Right now we talked about 3 dimensions perspective, but right now what I drew for you are flat silhouettes. So what I'm going to show you is also how we can create the 3 dimensions of these volumes of forms, which is the idea of using a wireframe. So if you guys anything build with 3Ds, we use a wireframe to give our sense of volume. So these are essentially lines that will cross contour around these structures, much like the bamboo has segmentation that gives you the volume of a very simple cylinder form stacked on top of each other. But like bamboo, we'll also then have branches and different directions of leaves and whatnot, kind of building off of the stem. So even here, I can branch off in a different direction, getting an even more complex shape. So we have something that is a single microbe or bacterial form, rounded shape that becomes even more complex with the way we start to manipulate the structure by pulling in different directions. As I start to pull them in different directions, these can then evolve even further to even more complex machines or forms, things like even maybe insects. If I look at an insect structural element, we can then see it. Let me shrink this down a bit more. And I'm going to evolve downwards. We might see insect shapes from, let's say, a side view that has a structure of a head, structure of a thorax, structure of an abdomen. Now, what I'm going to this point is bringing back this concept of relationship back over here. So I'm looking at a singular subject matter right now, insect forms, right? So insect forms have this relationship between them, all of them, that we can find and discover through research, through the biology, and all the studies. And right now I just did a really simple side view study to understand its basic proportions. This is a hopper, like a grasshopper, and it's very general, but it now gives me 3 elements: the head, the thorax, and the back end section, what we call the abdomen. So here we're going from a very complex 3-dimensional organic shape to a side view study, but if I move that then into a 3-dimensional form, I'm going to mix things now from geo to organic. So let's get that head shape. Let's use a line to partition and group together the main elements of shapes. Here is the thorax combined together. Now insects all share that same relationship. Every single one of them have a head, thorax, and abdomen. Then they also have the 3-leg structuring. So right now there are almost an infinite amount of combination of insects that we can see out there, from the colors to the patterns to proportion and function. And from there, now I'm starting to build it, right? So here is more 3-dimensional, 3/4 view of this insect being built out, using line, using shape, to get something that now represents a form that we can visually see in our own world. So from here, now that I've actually got something on the page, I can take this information and apply that then to many other insect forms. Now this is a primitive, basics of a structure, but through the memory of this, I can now build the confidence to say that, hey, because I can figure out this insect, I'm sure the other ones won't be as complex also, or not as hard, which is very true for me. So this is now a mold, it's an archetype, and I can apply that to every other insect that is out there. Let's take it a little bit further and actually go more complex than this.
Before we move on from
Yeah,
insect, and one of the things I want to jump in here with is there's a couple people in the chat who ask, do you need to know drawing when you're doing 3D or to be a digital artist or a 3D artist? And I think that example is kind of a perfect way to show how understanding drawing, understanding form and shape and proportion like that can only benefit you in any other medium that you're using.
It does. It just highly elevates your awareness of it, too. And you need other, I guess, visual platforms to be able to see it from different angles of views. Because as you start to educate yourself, not everybody learns the same way. Some people learn really well through 2D. Some people learn really well through 3D. But the experiences of all those things round you out, and it adds to your understanding.
I think it's a huge note that this is the foundation. Every single artist you'll see throughout this festival talks about shape language.
Yeah.
And what did Peter start with? He started with circles, triangles, and squares.
Yeah.
And how do those things iteratively build upon one another? So this is the foundation and the building block, which is why we wanted it here right out the gate in the first week of this festival, to show you all some 101 of this, and you're going to see this repeat in every single painting that gets painted throughout this festival.
Absolutely.
Great questions, though. Thank you all.
Yeah, if you guys have more questions out there, please do ask. We're going to go from something a bit more, as a primitive animal, as an insect, they're small in scale, they're easy to figure out because the shapes are extremely visual and relatable towards the primitive forms of boxes and cylinders because the exoskeleton really communicates that. But if we start to go even more complex and evolve these animals even further and these understandings of drawing, I'm going to use a balloon and a string to communicate this idea of how to control good proportion for larger and more complex animals too. This balloon will represent our head and cranium, which the string will represent our spine. This will give us two basic things in drawing that we need to have when drawing very complex things. I'm going to increase the canvas size about this a bit longer. Let's make this about 30. This is going to be a very long canvas, which shows you an entire evolution of how we take simple lines and shapes towards something more complex. So if we take, let's say, like a horse, for me, I'm going to start with the balloon and the string. So I use that to help me control two aspects. One, proportion. How long is this animal, right? So I could use two gestural forms, a circle and a line to get that. Then it also sets scale. How big do I want my drawing to be? A lot of you guys who have sketchbooks, sometimes if you're not really good at controlling scale, you get drawings that are really too big or too small and you kind of misplace them, they fall off the page. So we should be able to actually coordinate and lay out the pages with a lot more control and intention because you know where you want to place them. So here, now that I have the balloon and string, so here, at this point, what I have is a very, very easy construction of, let's say, again, an animal like a horse. Let me change out the eraser real fast. And I'm going to add then the joint structures. Here's where the elbows down to the knees are connected down into. Let's put a little bit additional forms behind that, down to the ankles, the feet, and the ground plane. And then, by the way, I actually had this lecture before this, about half an hour ago. It was a 3-hour class I was doing under CGMA. So this is just basically me just repeating everything I just said earlier. Let's start to add additional profiles of silhouettes. And this is just the archetype, again, the underlying shape structure for this particular animal, a general animal, like an equine. So I can take then this proportional study of a side view, which like we did in the insect, and apply it to so many different types of animals too. For example, I could take that balloon and string and elongate the neck. We can take the internal body shapes, give it those long legs, give it a hump up here too, connect all these joints, and then I can make a giraffe. Here's a silhouette of it. I can also take that shape and form and apply it to, let's say, a bird. Here is the neck, down into the body. Here's the beak. Now, I know these are very basic and simple drawings, and as easy as this seems to be coming out, it's actually not as easy as it looks. Because as you are observing something for the first time, if you don't understand its proportion and shape language, you're unable to express the accuracy that you need to be able to capture it. So that is why you want to be able to, again, practice this early method of shape combinations as much as possible. Right now, as we go down the line, we'll get even more complex and detailed as we go along. So this is just from a side view. And let me show you even just the relationships of shapes and even more clarity. When I was a student at Art Center, the one thing I could not draw, in Art Center I was maybe 21 years old. I started in 2001. And one of the first projects I ever got was to draw a horse because I was designing a character and he had a mount. And I figured out very instantly that I did not know how to draw a horse. I couldn't sketch it. So what I decided to do was spend 14 weeks to sculpt a horse with sculpting with an armature wire. And I figured it out, got something really good, and spent hours upon hours getting all the anatomy in place. But once I then did it, I realized afterwards still, I could not draw the horse. I could not figure out how to actually sketch it. I knew some of the anatomy, but I spent so much time on the details, I didn't really understand how to build it. So here is a really quick construction of shapes that shows you how I can use it towards a zebra, a donkey, maybe a Garanuk or an ibex, whatever the case is. And here it could be very much a zebra. Let's put a mane on there and we might have that form. So I had to use a class like this, which we call dynamic sketching, to really figure out exactly how to then translate and relate shapes together of different subject matters. So here I can take the exact same combination I found, a circle, a sphere. I then applied a kite on the top plane and then a box towards the front. So even here with this animal, let's elongate it this time. And let's put the box in the front, and this time let's actually squish it down really small. And I'm going to use this line right here, which represents the mandible, the jaw. I'm going to take these corners and bring a cross contour over. Pretty much everything we've done on this side is being now translated over to this end. I'm going to use lines to throw in some horns. Let's find where the ear is supposed to go. Throw in some lines for then the neck form and shape. And this combination shape actually can represent the giraffe. So I can use this for every other kind of animal similar to it. And all I need to do is really figure out then the individual details of how I can then solve that problem of surfacing muscles to then the skin, the flesh, the fur, patterns, whatever the case is. And I start to get something that feels a little bit more realistic, that feels a bit more representative of the things that I can see around me. Again, the hardest part about this is about training your eyes to see something simple. It's easy to say, but it's hard in practice. Once I understand that aspect of it, then I can spend the time to isolate the groupings of details and invest into using those same repetitions over and over and over again, and then the speed increases, the confidence increases, and then you have the ability to draw anything. I don't agree with people that say, I can't draw this and I can't draw that. I'm only really good at animals or people. Well, if you understand how to draw a human being, there's no reason why you can't draw a car, or you can't draw a spaceship, or you can't draw a weapon. Because if you understand how you drew a person was about constructing a form and proportion, so is everything else. So you are thinking then about the details, the complexity of the function, the history or the culture, but think a little bit minimally and more basics to the shapes, and hopefully you can then construct those things as well too. So I don't believe in that factor of it. If you give enough time and deconstruct your entire world, you should be able to sketch it and draw it to a minimal degree. So here is an insect, side view. Animals, more complex side views, and then 3/4 shots of heads, all being constructed by the basic primitive shapes that came from the early sides of line. From this side, we can then come back and introduce this idea of shapes and what shapes actually mean. And I want to keep track of time to make sure I'm not going over.
You're doing great.
Okay.
Yeah, you got 45. This
Okay,
is so much fun.
And I'll slow down if I need to. Again, I tend to
People are loving this. Yeah.
move relatively quickly. So I'm
up,
going to bring this
BMTP?
in, introduce a little bit of actual design introduction to this now too, because we're talking about the basics and fundamentals of these forms, but I also want to talk about how we can then use these forms, because when you begin, you draw these shapes, you draw these things, and I can train you to look for shape language, and you might think, okay, I have those forms, I know what they look like. I can see that a sphere is used for a head, I can see that diamond's used for the top of the skull over here, whatever the case is. But what do I do with these forms? How do I actually play with them? What do I use them for design? Well, let's go into the idea of verbal language again. The idea that these shapes that we are creating from the very beginning has some sort of visual communication, but now we're going to also tie them together with verbal communication. Words and shapes, or visual shapes, really link together well. The circle, as a common, like maybe 3 words, fit nicely. Let's say it's like a shape that has words like soft, or nice, or cute. We can agree that these general words apply to that shape well, okay, generally. We could also say the square is a good confident form. It's a boring form. Maybe it's, a very stubborn shape. we can agree, again, that these words generally attach to that shape fairly well. The triangle could be dynamic. It could have speed. It could also be dangerous. We can all agree, again, that these shapes represent these words fairly well. And the more words we attach to a shape, the more complex that communication becomes. So now imagine if I'm designing a creature, a character, a vehicle design, and I combine these shapes together, what kind of visual language are you trying to communicate to your audience, right? Simple as that. So what it takes is you sitting there, researching, writing, sketching very minimal things. Let's continue expanding this a bit longer out, and we'll draw more on this side. It's going to be a long timeline. So here, let's say we take that horse again, or zebra. Let's draw that from a side view over. Here is then the spine. Let's repeat that real quickly. And I'm going to do something in 3/4 view with more detail. The last image. We then have the limb structures, back end section. Right? Real simple, minimal, basic form and structure.
People are saying Bob would be proud.
He is someone I grew up watching, after during high school. I would get up in the morning waiting for the bus, and before I had to get out there to the bus stop, I would turn on the TV in PBS, and there he would be, showing his demos, and I would just watch that before going to class in high school. So he was very much part of just not only entertainment, but art influence for sure. So here's, again, a basic horse structure. Rough, keep it rough. In the beginning, for a lot of you guys when you're drawing, don't worry about how perfect or how clean it needs to be. That's not what it's about. It's about having the tools and the understanding and the confidence to just express. It's about quantity at this point too. Quality comes towards the end of it when you have a full understanding and familiarity. So let's start to play around a little bit. There are two things in design that we have to be able to control really well. Shape, then proportion. Through the use of shape, I've been able to control proportion here really well. I'm measuring things, line and form. I've told you what shapes could potentially define or express. If I combine them together, we can then start to play around a little bit. What if I had a horse inspiration of a shape? Let's elongate his neck. Let's kind of shorten his spine. Let's increase the scale of his upper torso. Here's his ribs, and let's bring down the hips a bit further. But let's take the arms and extend them out like this. And then maybe the back end legs will be kind of more shortened out like that. Here's the ground plane. Here are some of the joints. Again, this is just a silhouette, a design that I've just created based on proportion of an animal that doesn't exist, but is being inspired by the world that I can observe, my own nature, right? So
two quick questions.
Yeah,
for you,
go ahead.
Peter. Do you use photo references? You're doing this all from memory, but have you done so much work with photo references?
Yes, absolutely. And the photo reference is highly important. But here's something else that negates that was it's observation of the real things. All right. Now, what I'm suggesting, the idea is that you should be going out there and looking for real forms, real three-dimensional objects that you can observe, experience. So I'm going to go to a zoo. I'm going to observe animals. I'm going to look at horses. I'm going to look at zebras. I'm going to look at whatever the case is. So the more I observe, I'm able to then collect a massive amount of data. But then the question comes up for many students well, I don't have these kind of locations to go to. I don't even have the funds to pay for things like tickets and such. Can't I just use references? Well, of course, obviously at the end of the day you can. And do I? Absolutely. But still, any opportunity you would get to be able to observe these things in real life, you should, because there are other things in observation that you should be able to get, which is something like, how about experiences? People that you will get to meet, things that you don't expect to see. Those add to the memory, the smells, the sounds, the interactions, the noises of the animals, all those kind of things add to my experience level. So with that information, it holds up that visual vocabulary even longer. Because what I'm trying to do is memorize these things, but if I'm only going by a picture, then I'm not really going to retain it as well as I want to. So that's why I think going out location really helps a lot. What if I had a horse shape and I really broadened up his legs, made it really heavy and thick? What I'm trying to do right now is break the design. I'm trying to take it to an area where it doesn't really work, but I'm pushing and pulling directions of proportion to see what happens. So in nature, things like this already happen. And all you have to look at is even within our own forms, the human form, and see what happens in relatable animals between us. So primates, right? If you look at a human being, a human arm, if it's as simple as a human arm, let's say it's deltoid up here. Let's go with the bicep over here, tricep, brachialis, forearm muscle groupings. This is the basic human arm. But if I took this human arm and did things what nature's already done within primates, chimpanzees, eyes, whatever the case is, what have they done? They take that same muscle grouping and apply a different function to it. Let's elongate the forearm now. By elongating the forearm, like in chimpanzees, what they use them is for mobility, right? To be able to get around because they're quadrupeds. So they have elongated forearms to be able to elevate their heads and see where they're going. So here is nature adapting and using it for function. So all they did was extend that out. What I am doing is taking the base horse form and stretching, pulling, increasing scale, shrinking things down, and getting a multitude of variations. So what I've done for you is just a few minutes of just exploring a couple of shapes. In the industry, if I'm taking this as a asset or some kind of client work, I could produce pages upon pages of silhouettes and studies of side views like this. If I only have even an hour, I could produce 30, 40 just for you.
And this is something, I don't want to move beyond this real quick,
Yeah.
because this is something also that came up in the chat, and I have a couple questions
Sure,
around this.
absolutely.
A lot of people are saying so much of this industry is going 3D.
Yeah.
And there's a question from Andre Peleus of how's it like being known as a 2D guy in an increasing 3D heavy industry.
Yeah.
But one of the huge advantages, and even for us at KitBash, we start with 2D for designing the kits that we build.
Right.
Which, because of how quick it is to get ideas and iterations out in 2D.
Yes.
And like what you were able to do, and when you work for a gig, you can produce such quantity of ideas so
Right.
quickly because you're working like this.
Yeah, and that's a part of it too. What you just said is about the idea, not about the hardware or the tools that you're using. Because I could draw and also create in 3D. And there are some people in 3D that can actually express and formulate shapes really quickly too. But at the end of the day, it's about your ability to be able to create interesting ideas. So whatever tool that you are going to be using is going to be appropriate, which is why that question for me, I don't get concerned about. The idea of being a 2D guy in a 3D world, well, again, if it comes out to a really great idea and I'm able to express in the amount of time and the speed that I need to have, where someone else in 3D can also do as fast too, again, whose ideas then trump each other's, right?
Yeah.
Whose concept, whose even process of being able to problem solve that particular issue of a design. So yeah, I don't feel concerned about that at all. And at the same time, I'm not saying I'm against 3D. I actually really enjoy 3D. I explore it myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a part of it.
Amazing, yeah, and I think that's probably hopefully going to comfort a lot of the people in the chat right now who are 2D artists who are like, crap, do I have to learn 3D?
Right.
I've put so much time into developing my 2D skills.
Absolutely.
But I think, just like you said, it's if it's your idea, if you can get the ideas
Yeah.
out quicker in whatever medium, that's the most important part.
Definitely.
Anyway, sorry, I don't want to slow
No,
you
no.
down. I just wanted to address that's been coming up in the chat quite a
No,
bit.
it's fine. We're almost getting to the completion of this last portion of this timeline right now. So if there's any other questions from people, please ask at any time. I'd be more than happy to talk about it.
Will humans get tails in back in?
Well, humans get tails back in the future.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Is there some kind of functional, I guess, advantage to it? Who knows? Maybe. We have leftover tail remnants, right? The tailbone. So,
Who knows?
yeah.
You've heard it here first. Tails coming back.
Yeah, that was OP Returns was who asked that question. He just got lucky. That was the first question that popped up when you said, "Are there more questions?"
And it was a good question, OP. Keep them coming.
Yeah, if you guys have any other questions, let Peter know, and you can keep going too.
Okay, yeah, we can go back to the last section of this now. And this will be the last piece that I'll do on this timeline. And we can go to our next stage of another demo that I'm going to go for. But we can take one of these designs, and I'm kind of favoring the one at the bottom because I feel like there's a really interesting combination of proportion and shapes going on. And I'm going to just kind of push this now in a different angle of view. Let's actually even use a little bit different brush. And again, the brush I'm looking for is just something to give me a nice, strong, crisp line. There we go. Okay, let's choose that.
Oh man, this is a great question too.
Yeah, please.
How would you deconstruct things like energy blasts or smoke?
Everything is based on shape. I'll show you the one shape I use. It's this, the Star Trek logo. Okay, I use that shape right there. That shape I can apply towards fire, towards lightning, towards smoke, and water. If you don't think how that's going to be possible, I can show you. We can take, let's say, a log that's like burning, looking like at black embers and stuff like that, but we can make the fire emanate from it. And this is going to curl inwardly, have sharp angles and curves and stuff like that, and that's going to move into then smoke, which then has billowing shapes and forms. Now, I'm taking elements of this shape, of that logo, and applying it to different areas inside here. And everything is based on a graphic form to be able to communicate what's going on. If I then have things of action movements of, let's say, this arm is hitting the ground, right? Then I'm going to start to have kick-ups of dust or energy or forms. And right now, these shapes I'm using are not any different than what I've shown you right here. Again, this then emanates to then bigger sparks or flames or smoke and fire and mist, all that stuff I just talked about. Is just being communicated through a combination of this primitive form. I've boiled it down to an essence of a shape that I can recombine together to be able to communicate things like even effects. So if I have water dropping from, let's say, a waterfall, and I have a bunch of stones over here kind of collected together, and the waterfall is hitting a platform, then we have these sharp angles as it moves over this direction, falls again, and then have more of that kind of shape language kind of being thrown off, patterns of forms. So I'm able to reuse it, readapt it, reapply it in many different areas. Again, this kind of helps me solve a lot of the problems of being able to not only build memory, but to be able to just isolate and control and increase speed. What it also does is it massively increases confidence, because now I can draw all these things with the use of a basic idea of a singular form and just being able to combine them in different ways together. So right now these are just small little thumbnails, but when a full detailed piece I need to go for, trust me, any illustration or sketch of things I've done, if you really analyze it, you can find these kinds of shapes all over the place. And that's kind of the building blocks to even that. So even effects, things that feel almost ethereal or even things like motion based can be combined through form, especially in a still image of a drawing, yet capturing motion. Hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, that was amazing.
I think you did. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Amazing.
You have to understand these questions I've heard countless times, and I've had to problem solve them myself. So these are things and answers to questions that I've expressed many times over again. So I know the exact thing to say in terms of what their question is. But like I said, we have to understand that this is advice. I'm not here to give you guys answers. I'm here to give you guys a direction in terms of what you can follow. And from that, I'll give you the main thing that my mentor gave to me, which was one little quote. Take it, pick it up, and run with it. Make it your thing. So all the fundamentals I'm giving you right now, try them, but then question them. Break them if you have to. See what else you can do with it that will go beyond what I can do with it. The reason why I teach in the first place is to help people to become better than me. All right, that's the whole point of teaching. Because if I can increase skill sets and understanding for other people, what that's going to do is enforce me to also be better than them. Okay, so I'm trying to then elevate myself. So if other people out there, and there are students I've had that are far better illustrators and draftsmen than I am, and I'm happy about that. But again, that in turn is going to want to force me to become even better. So through this, whoever's listening out there, again, like I said, take these basic fundamentals and ideas and see what you can do with them. And don't just copy, paste, copy to understand, then break it, all right? So push it beyond what your understanding is too. So here we're just kind of building this same animal off to the side in 3/4 view. Pushing, pulling, understanding in 3 dimensions, and maybe the muscle blocks, right? So I've taken now an inspiration of an animal, a horse, and I have now pushed it in different directions. I'm not really even applying anatomy. I'm just really applying just big masses of forms to represent areas of anatomy. So I can say that this is kind of like the foot area, this is like the limb area. It's got this kind of elongated snout and muzzle form. We then have these kind of elongated ears. Again, it's inspired by the animal. So think about any film, any game, any movie you've watched and looked at some of the creatures or aliens and any designs from vehicles and weapons, and think about, well, what are things that they've looked at to problem solve those things, and how they're able to then visualize and mix and mold things together to get something that feels fresh or unique. So there's not really anything original per se. There's always something that's inspired or researchable, right? Something that's based on observation, something that we can study. So for me, that's why I heavily rely upon that aspect of it. So I can create something that is kind of weird. I don't know. So I've kind of broke it at this point, but it's fun. And it's interesting. That's the big point about this too, is I'm actually just having fun drawing this thing. Is it the best result? Is it the best design? Not really. I don't think so. But it's definitely fun to create, being here with these guys and, talking to you, everyone as well. That's the whole point of what we do in the industry, right? Don't forget that aspect, hopefully.
One of the questions that came in is Klepto Plays asks, are there any forms that you find very off-putting to create?
off-putting to create, not necessarily, especially if it's inspired by nature, but there are things that can happen where they don't really follow nature. It breaks the rules of nature, and because of it, we look at it and question, like, that doesn't really work, that doesn't make sense to us. And I'll give you a prime example of it. Let's go back to the human arm. What nature has done is extended the forearm, but let's do the complete opposite. Let's take the upper deltoid, let's take the upper arm and elongate that. Here's the bicep, here are the triceps, all that stuff. And, brachialis is in there too, forearm muscles. But then let's take that forearm muscle and the forearm area and just kind of shrink it down really small and make the hand really tiny.
T-Rex arms.
It's T-Rex arms, but does that really work, in terms of what we do? What does it even express? It breaks a lot of the rules of what's already been done in nature, too. So what it shows us is that it's not really functional. It's not a functional arm. And because of it, it doesn't click for us. That's not to say you can't do that. What if I had like a mutated creature, right? Something that was maybe evolved in a different direction or was hit by radiation or something like that. And so parts of it are asymmetrical and distorted. Well, that's the reasoning why. It's a non-functional arm, but in nature, most times, you'll see this kind of rule set being applied. So then I follow those basic rule sets too. I elongated the forearms. I elongated the upper arms. I didn't shrink them down. So this creature literally had these arms attached to it. I don't know, that'd be kind of, wouldn't really work, I would say. It's
the
definitely
chat's
funny.
going, I hate it, delete it, kill it.
That's the great thing about what we do. We get to play around and express and try things that sometimes don't work. But that's why when you guys create and when you sketch, you don't get rid of any drawing. Always hold on to every scrap, even if it's one that you feel like doesn't make any sense or it is broken or it's a bad drawing. Because now we have a comparison. We know what something that doesn't work and we can find something that might work. But without that visual evidence, then you won't be able to really understand. So you have to try all results of things. And the more you do so, hopefully you get a better grouping, but then you become even more aware of it. And the next time you design something, you make less mistakes. You're able to avoid certain problems and jump to some successes even faster. So that's been one of the main solutions for me.
I love that the chat is trying to find what stumps you, and I feel like I've spent enough time with you to know that there isn't anything that you're gonna draw that's going to stump you. That hands and feet in perspective are not a big deal for him. And people in the chat are like, "What about hands? What about hands?"
Of course, of course.
The thing that's so amazing about your approach to this is because you have a basic underlying philosophy, like a very strong underlying philosophy of how do I take any form and break it down into the fundamental shapes. Finding what is the sphere of the head, where's the balloon, right? And, and where's the kite at the top of a horse's head? Like these ideas of taking any form and breaking it down into the primitive shapes means that no form is off limits. Like nothing's out of bounds. It's just about spending the time to figure out what the puzzle pieces are.
Exactly. I mean, that's right there is the analogy I use for a drawing. It's about finding those puzzle pieces. I can show you a box that's a picture of a design or a thing that we can see in observation, and I give you all the puzzle pieces, and you are then putting it together to find your own visual. But if you're missing puzzle pieces, you're missing elements of the shapes or missing elements of the details, then you don't have a complete picture. So your job then, as you are researching, drawing on site, or drawing from references and images, is to gather those puzzle pieces so you have a more complete picture of whatever you're creating feels like, looks like, functions, or has a story to. And that's kind of one of the ways I like to explain about drawing, is that when I'm on site, I'm essentially looking for data. I'm looking for pieces of the puzzles. Here's a little bit more up-close details of what this head of this animal might look like too. So as you notice, I kind of moved a little bit quicker into the details. I was able to kind of still structurally underlie some form and shape to express a scale or plane, and then from there I can then start to elevate the contrast levels, the hatching. Maybe there's some patterns that this animal has on the surfacing, and I can start to indicate those patterns as well too. So as you can see, my mind tends to work relatively quickly. So as I'm thinking of something, my hand is able to keep up and express it just as quickly too. But a lot of this is then coming back down to that one word, mileage. Just a massive amount of drawing that you just have to do. And there's no secret to this. There's no shortcut a way around it. You just have to sit and just do it. And the more effort and time you are able to put into it, the better you'll get at it. And there are, of course, balances between how you should do it. There's appropriate ways, and also ways that can kind of damage you. Because drawing, in my opinion, is actually a very physically demanding thing. it can hurt you. It's actually hurt me. I've had a lot of neck problems to the point where I have to go to the hospital and stuff like that during art center because I draw so much. I think there's an appropriate balance to it. So be mindful.
There's a question here. What is the best way to learn perspective and keep things sized correctly so it does not look off?
Well, I mean, of course, you have to start from the very base of the beginning. Understanding, do you know what a horizon line is? Can you then understand 1-point, 2-point perspectives? Can you then build those boxes and cubes in the accurate perspective? Having a class is going to be the best, I think, results. Having someone there showing it to you, because some of those concepts you can read about, look through books and different sorts of tutorials, but until someone actually sits down and shows you those things too, it can be kind of hard to click. It's much like math in a lot of ways as well. So, I mean, the first time I took perspective at Art Center, I actually bombed it. I didn't do very well because, one, I understood the concepts, but I didn't know actually how to apply it. There was a lot of memory-based things too, so that was a huge part of the problem too. But after I kind of failed at it, I went through Art Center like, still being somewhat insecure about perspective all the way throughout. It wasn't until I started going to my graduating year, I decided I needed to retake perspective because I still feel really inconfident about it. And I retook it with a bunch of first years, and I was graduating. And I had to, because if I didn't, I knew I would graduate still feeling very, very anxious about this. And even then, you can't take enough of perspective. So if you've taken it once, take it again, okay? If you've taken it multiple times, make your own book out of it, like take down your own notes, really get a sense of how you can really apply it. But I think that's really where you need to start, is actually go to someone, go to a classroom, go to a workshop, go to something that can give you something there one-on-one, a hands-on approach. You can read as many books as possible, but again, you will not be able to filter all that information and really understand where it applies. So that's what I would always recommend, is take classes again.
One thing I want to point out that I think is really funny is the chat is exploding with how they think you're a Jedi, which is pretty hilarious considering that last night Peter was a Jedi for Halloween.
I was, yes.
Take a look at that.
Oh, great.
There he is. Peter the Jedi.
Peter Han style.
Nice.
And this is why you got to follow him on Instagram at
Yeah.
Peter Han style.
Yeah, do yourself a favor.
Awesome.
I'm gonna put that in the chat just so that you guys have it.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the entire canvas right here. This starts, again, real quickly from the basics of a line and evolves like evolution in a timeline all the way through to the end of being able to create your own things. So unless you're able to just draw a line, and people say it's like, I can only draw stick figures. Well, you're able to draw a human being and representation of what that human might look like. Start from there and then build 3 dimensions, right? Understand shapes, then interlock things together. Start to mold and push manipulation. Start to study in real life, and before you know it, who knows? You might be able to create your own variations of stuff. Maybe you won't get to the level of aesthetic and control that you want to, but at least you now have a good idea and the skill sets to build over time. You're talking about someone here who's done this for 20 years. So this is 20 years of experience compacted into one timeline in the session of drawing. So it'll take that long potentially for some of you, but actually maybe even less, because I think a lot of you guys are getting exposed to so much information faster that you have a lot stronger concepts and ideas, more than what we may have had 20 years ago, So some interesting times right now because of it.
That's amazing. One of the things that people in the chat asked is whether or not you recommend to learn using a tablet or using digital drawing versus learning from practicing on pen and paper.
Both at the same time, because they're going to go hand in hand. Especially for drawing to Cintiq, the muscle memories again are going to be the same. Yeah, well, yes and no. Here's one question I got from a student before too. Do you rotate your Cintiq? Obviously this thing doesn't rotate. So I don't rotate the canvas, I don't rotate the Cintiq. I'm sitting here moving my arm on a singular plane in one direction. When I draw on a piece of paper, I actually do rotate quite a bit. So that means I've had to actually learn extra muscle memory skills to go to digital side. But it did stem from the analog. So could it work the other way around? With these muscle memory skills on a Cintiq, I could take it to drawing as well too. The one X factor is the tablet. The tablet is a completely different, because the hand-eye coordination, you're looking at the screen, but you're drawing down here. So it feels a little bit awkward. That takes a bit of time to relearn some of those gestures. But I think it doesn't matter where you begin, it's the very start of it. Can you just start drawing every day, even a little bit, 5-10 minutes, or you're drawing every single day. And from there, you'll start to dabble, play around, different hardwares, analog and digital. And that's where you will get that bug bite and you'll go at it, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and this is a pretty incredible breakdown of how to use shape language and the entire evolution to get to drawing, pretty much anything you want. If this feels like you've been listening to an Audible book at 5x speed, don't worry. This is being recorded, and it will be posted onto our YouTube later.
Cool.
So you will be able to break this down into pieces.
And congratulations, you're now eligible for a bachelor's in fine arts.
Well, it's so cool, Peter. Was there another demo you wanted to do?
I mean, we have the time. We can try something. I know I was going to play with maybe something with your guys' assets, the KitBash3d stuff, and how I, as a 2D artist, would use something like this. And even if I had access to then the 3D models to be able to compose them together to give it just a basic building block, and then be able to draw on top of that to be able to say, well, here's how I can add some story. Here's how I can start to distort or change things using even a primitive model or something that is highly designed. If we have the time to, we can. But if not, I understand.
You tell us. Could you do it in 15 minutes?
I mean, at the speed of Peter Hahn, we can do anything.
Possibly. I mean, I can add something in there.
Or if you want to do keep drawing and do more of this. Either way.
What does the audience say?
Audience, you want to see Peter using some 3D renders and painting and drawing on top of those? See how he uses KitBash in his work, or do you want to see more drawing demos and more 2D stuff?
I can do.
We got some 3D. Do it, yes, please do it.
A lot of
please,
do
3D,
it.
3D,
Yeah,
3D,
3D.
3D
renders. Jesus. Okay, 3D it is.
Right on. Well, yes.
Why don't we do this? Let's cut to a quick 2-minute video, and then we'll get this prepped and set up and get Peter on this.
Okay. Cool.
Well, actually, could I throw while you guys prep that? Could I throw out a couple things, or do we need to cut?
Do
it
your
away?
thing.
While this gets switched over, I want to remind you all that ArtStation has been so cool as to offer everyone in the audience 2 free months of ArtStation Pro. If you go to artstation.com/promo and you put in KitBash Pro, you will get 2 free months of ArtStation. They have been so cool, and thank you to ArtStation for joining us on this adventure here. It means so much to us that we've been able to team up with Twitch and this Bob Ross Marathon to bring things like what we've got here with Peter and the rest of the artists. And so if you do not know, or you're just checking into this, you might have passed by our page. Thank you so much for joining us. What this is of course the Bob Ross Marathon is going on, and between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. the Bob Ross Marathon takes a break, and we ferry you across from your Bob Ross fix to your next one. What we're doing here, though, is we're showing how digital art can be used, and how digital art is made today with fantastic artists like Peter and a bunch of our other buddies, how they make digital art for movies and video games. And Peter today has broken down how you can use shape language, unique shapes to build on top of as a base layer for any kind of drawing you want, and then add those shapes to build out your worlds.
Yeah. And what Peter's going to be using today, and if we can jump over to his screen, he's going to be using a render from the Utopia cover.
Okay, cool.
So this is a Utopia kit from KitBash3d, and this is a render done by Leon Tucker.
Max, can you briefly explain what KitBash3d is?
Yeah, for those of you in the chat who aren't aware of KitBash3d and what we do, you can think of us as digital Legos. We build 3D worlds and 3D assets so that you can jump straight into creating the worlds of your imagination. If you need to build a medieval castle or a futuristic city, you can go to KitBash, you can grab a kit of the style that you want to play with, and it's set up and ready to go, so you can start placing models and building out 3D scenes and rendering them out and drawing like Peter.
And so what you see here on your screen, which was there a moment ago, are the digital pieces here. Kind of like Legos, this is our Utopia kit that has been assembled here that Peter is then drawing on top of. Oftentimes you'll see, and what you'll see throughout this festival is a lot of 3D artists will do a block out like this, set a render with their lighting, and then they pull the image out into Photoshop, which Peter's in now, and then do what's called a paint over on top of it.
Yeah, so I was looking through a couple collection of the images, and obviously, if I take away some of the layers, it's a very complex, build. Well, it's primitive to a degree, but as a 2D artist, there's a lot of stuff going in there. And it helps because we can isolate where the locations of things are. It gives us a plane, a perspective, and we can follow suit with this. So if I was to build this in 2D, it would take a large amount of time to get there. So having something in place now gives me something to build on top of. I know the perspective, I know the shape language, I know where things are, and now I can start to even create a storyline on top of it. And when I saw this image, I thought of, for some reason, instantly a race, like a space race. I saw a bunch of ships like flying into the corners, like trying to get to a checkpoint. So then you have like a crowd of people, or crowds of groups of people everywhere, or just other kind of buildings. And these shapes really kind of gave me that idea, I guess, behind it. I was just inspired by it. So again, stuff like this I can then use to help build it with a faster degree. And we only have about 15 minutes, so let me create a shape of a ship that might be inspired by things I love studying, which is things like underwater oceanography or marine life. So I might have a ship that is very much inspired by sharks or something like that, right? So I'm going to create a basic shape over here. Let's throw in some lines of forms to draw through, and I do a really quick sketch to kind of figure out things of where they're going. And I'm not really concerned about things like line quality. I'm not really concerned about things like the way it looks right now. I'm playing with this thing. And a lot of you guys that begin with this also, you can't lock up. You can't sit there thinking, okay, what I'm going to produce has to be perfect. It has to be just right. That mentality will set you up for failure every single time. So right now, I'm not really trying to figure exactly all these lines and details just yet. I just want to be able to capture exactly what I need to place. Maybe there's another building over here, or a vehicle over here. What's the shape language for that one? Maybe I'll use things like a swordfish or something like that.
Is this the sort of thing you do when working in games? Like they give you a rough block out of the level and then you'd kind of go on top of it and kind of try to flush out the design language?
So the environment artist will give us sometimes simple builds of a level, and we'll go in there and add things like foliage or details, and we'll rough things up if we need to, add textures. But we can build off of that, and then they can take that, rebuild it, add those details and put it into the game as an asset. So I would definitely do that a lot from every level, from environments to then even props, even character designs. We would do a basic build, and we go back on top of them, redraw over. So we're always working back and forth with multiple groups of people. It doesn't start and stop with one individual person. You're always going back and reworking things again. So I would have maybe like the 3D artist going over to my desk and be like, hey, by the way, I couldn't really see what was going on over on this side of your drawing, so I kind of built it out real quickly. Can you go over it again? Just kind of give me some details. And I'm able to do so. So there's a lot of communication involved based on multiple artists going in together, hand in hand, to be able to problem solve exactly how best they can problem solve that problem to put it into whatever medium they're trying to go for. So that's a huge part of the industry, I would say.
Awesome.
So right now I'm actually just building out all the ships first. I'm going to think about this being kind of like the checkpoint, and they're going to have entryway going this direction. Here's my basic perspective grid that I can kind of build from there. Horizon lines way back over here. So I'm just giving myself a primitive. Now if I had the time, of course, what I do is as a simple sketch, I go back on top of this and clean things up. This is all on single layers at the moment. So from there, I can build and build and build. So I'm going to also edit. I can cancel out things I don't need. I can add to this if I need to. I'm going to group things together. Maybe there's too much shape in some areas. I'm going to collect it and group it into big forms. So here's going to be like an audience stand on this side. And this is going to be a spire. We're going to have a lot more of maybe the people that are high status, rich people kind of sitting on top of that, watching the actual scene. As you're noticing, I'm also talking through as I'm drawing. In my head, I tend to do that a lot as well. I think of a story. I think about what's happening in these areas. Who's going to be inside that? What kind of activity is going to be going on over here? As I do so, I apply essentially a function behind what that shape is. So these are just commoners. These are just people that are living inside that, and they're kind of watching the scene or that race from the ground level. Up here is where you have the upper deck, right? So this is where all the people are watching from. The shapes, I'm going to continue with this kind of rounded spear-like form. Again, reusing some of these shapes. I kind of want to blend that back in, some repeating elements on this side. Again, I'm just using drawing right now to do this. I can come back in there afterwards, start to do some value paintings. I'll kind of overlay on top of that as well. So we're just still building off of everything we had talked about before. I don't want to transition too extremely because you have to be able to see the bridges. So here is everything else.
A tiny boy says, "Hi Peter Hahn, what advice do you have for someone who wants to get into game development as an artist? Do you think that 2D and 3D are equally important skills to develop?"
Yes, and you should know the language of 3D, but build those skills of 2D. Just like everything we've talked about right now, it's about building the skills, the tools. You need the tools to be able to go in there and problem solve any situation that comes your way. When you're on a job, and let's say in like a studio of a game, you might not necessarily end up just doing one thing. you might be hired to, let's say, be a concept artist working in, doing things like weapons or creatures or whatever the case is. But you know what? At the production, some of those things are going to get finished, and you're going to be sitting there twiddling your thumbs. And they can't have you do that. So they might say, hey, can you do some like marketable pieces? Can you go in there and maybe do some texture for us? Can you apply them to some of the models? And again, I've had those situations where it's like, hey, we need storyboards for the cinematic. Can you draw that out for us? It's not concept, but I can figure that out because I have the skill sets to be able to do so. So right now, use 2D and 3D as skills to help you problem solve any potential situation that comes up that it shows your strengths as a designer and as an artist and a storyteller. And I think that's where it's going to give you longevity in the industry, where you can last, where you're not just a one, game pony kind of thing. Build on top of those skill sets. So yes, 2D and 3D have to go hand in hand. They are not separate. They go together.
Awesome.
So here's some of those shapes just kind of like being built out. Again, I'm just kind of canceling this out. So if I take away the 3D model, you start to see these really base shapes kind of being placed in. Stuff in the painting, obviously a lot of this stuff back here would be kind of gestural or just silhouettes and forms. So I may not put a lot of complex details back over here where the 3D model has that. But as a painting, I'm going to think about, focal points and silhouettes and shapes and color and lighting. So I know that a lot of these areas are not going to be as detailed as I wanted to be. So they're going to be more suggestions of lines. But that shape form is going to be like a lot of these curves and turns and spires. And I might just go back and take away the model and start drawing on top of this now. And we might have a lot of these kind of interesting, crazy shapes emanating from the original.
You can see so clearly how this workflow is so nice that a 3D artist could give a block out of something that you could go in there and refine it more and start to add more story elements and more shape language.
Absolutely.
And then to hand that back to a 3D artist who then would refine it and get it closer to it.
And that's everything in terms of what the pipeline system is going to be about for the industry. Let's kind of cut back into this one. Aspire with architectural elements I want to apply into it. A lot of archways and stuff like that.
Legendary Perry asks, what piece of work is Peter most proud of himself for?
Well, if it's professional work, something I've done in the past, one project that I really enjoyed was a commercial I helped design. And this was back in 2011. This is a couple of years back, a number of years back. And this company hits me up. And I was working for a company, Sony in San Diego at the time. And down there, I was picking up freelance work while I was working full time. I wasn't really teaching this heavily. I had a few classes, but I wasn't fully invested in education just yet. I was working production. So these guys hit me up on freelance and said, hey, we'd love to work with you. We saw some of your stuff on a blog. I didn't apply for the work. They just found me. And they said, it's a commercial. Would you want to work on it? I said, sure, absolutely. Can you sign this NDA and we'll, tell us your rate and we'll have you work on it. So I said, all right, cool. Here's my rate. I'll sign the NDA. And of course, they then sent me the information. And I kicked myself because, man, I could have asked for way more money. It was a commercial for the Super Bowl in 2011 for Coca-Cola. And they wanted me to design all the creatures and dragons and monsters and all that stuff inside the commercial. I was like, well, okay, whatever. It's going to be a great project. So I took it on, and it was a very bizarre project. It was the most bizarre project I've worked on because of this one fact. I would draw stuff. It would say, okay, can you design us an orc this week with a bunch of the weapons and armors, or design us a mount and this week over here? I only maybe worked on it for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And I would design stuff, and I would create it, and I would send them preliminary drawings, like after 2 or 3 days. And they would look at it and be like, great, nice job. Let's move on. Next design. I was like, all right, okay, cool. We'll keep going. So I said, let's do the dragon this week. Show us the iconic dragon. So I did a couple of pages of drawings and sketches. Did it in like a day or two. Sent it over, and they were like, awesome. That's great. Let's keep moving on. Next design. I said, all right, do you actually like it? Do you not like it? They weren't telling me anything. They just kept telling me, move on, keep drawing, keep going. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to the orcs now, design the main general orc, all that kind of stuff. Created it, sent it in, and they were just sketches. They were just drawings. And I was feeling a little bit weird because, like, shouldn't I be finishing this stuff? Like, I feel like I need to go in there with the feedback and maybe, like, alter it and maybe add some color. I don't know if you need it. So I wasn't expressing it, but I was just kind of thinking it. And so I went to the main, design of the general orc, and I finished that out in a couple of days, just sketching it. I actually painted it because I felt like I needed to. And they said, great, nice job. And at the end of the week and a half, they said, we're done. Thanks again for your help. And I didn't hear from them. So it was a week and a half just drawing. Like, that was kind of weird, and they paid me well. And then about a month or two goes by, and Super Bowl's playing. And I'm watching with a bunch of my friends, and there's that commercial. Just pops up. I'm like, oh man, those are all my drawings and designs. It's like, how do they take basic preliminary sketches and build them to production level models to animate and put them in a commercial that's a multi-million-dollar production? And it blew my mind so much because I didn't know how they did it. It wasn't until I found a video on YouTube of a making of for that commercial that I discovered that they took a lot of my drawings and they literally just built it. They just built it in 3D, just sketches. Drawings.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was really weird, but it was also the most fun I had, just because all I had to do was just sit there and draw orcs and dragons, and it was easy, but also not necessarily easy because it was something I could just do, but because it was just fun and it was easy to work with. They could communicate clearly, and they just said, "That's great, keep moving." It was very supporting. I never had an experience just like exactly like that all the time. It seems to be kind of rare, but
That's so cool to
Yeah.
see these rough sketches of yours actually be,
Yeah.
you know, up on the big screen in front of the Super Bowl. You know, that's incredible.
it was called Siege for Coca-Cola. You can find it on YouTube actually too. Not the full video, but the making of. So check it out if you want to. Anyways, here's a little bit of a build. I guess a
Yeah.
good start about where
They
all these
already
kind of
found
views
it.
are coming
Twitch
in.
was already all over it. That's amazing.
Awesome.
I mean, with this it's so incredible seeing what you put together here in 15 minutes.
Well, at this stage, I would kind of stop and I would then move into like some gradients. I would put a layer underneath this and start using the lasso tool to throw some values in, find my light sources, get my focal point, maybe to this guy towards this section with the eye line of that way. So that's going to be my general focal point in that section. That's my mindset right now. This is what I'm thinking several steps ahead of time. And then, of course, I would pace myself, go into the render, paint things out using photo bashing techniques or more 3D models, and try to get something more refined into a production level piece.
Yeah.
But this is a start. This is the beginning. So if you can't just sketch and draw and express and play with forms and shapes, all that extra detail and finesse and flashy things in Photoshop that can happen are not really going to support that underlying design sense. So yeah, this is where it can begin.
Amazing.
Well, we could
We could go
yeah.
forever. We got
Honestly,
2 minutes before the Bob Ross marathon kicks back on.
Yeah,
Cool.
so you'll get roped in right there. But
Good luck, Bob Ross. Try to follow that up.
well, but Peter, thank you immensely for doing this.
Yeah,
It is such a treat. I know for both of us and for everyone in the chat who's been so excited about it. Everyone from KitBash3d, we are just so delighted to have you here.
No, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for
Yeah,
having
thank
me. I
you.
appreciate you guys being out there watching. I know some of you might be in different time zones, really late, really early, but thank you for joining for us. It's awesome to have the opportunity to just draw for you. But,
Speaking of that, if you are in another time zone, throw it in the chat. We'd love to see how many different time zones here are represented. Peter, one thing I wanted to throw at you is we would love to have you back on the show and do more with you. And maybe over time we could build out some kind of monthly sort of thing like we do with Emmanuel Shu.
yeah, potentially. I'd be very open to that. So if there's someone always willing to listen, I'd be more than happy to share.
Yeah, let us know if you guys want to see more Peter Hahn in here.
Put that in the chat, please.
So a gift for you guys over here. This is a print that I brought in. This is
amazing.
A character I'm developing right now. I'm going to be having a comic producing, graphic novel by the
This
end of
is
the
the
year.
blacksmith.
The blacksmith.
This is
Awesome.
you guys go follow Peter Hahn Style on Instagram. You're gonna see tons of work like this. This is his personal project, the blacksmith. I
Yeah.
can't believe you gave it to us. This is
That's
incredible.
awesome. Thank you.
Of
man.
course.
We
Absolutely,
gotta
guys.
get this framed and we'll put it right in
Awesome.
that spot on the show.
There we go. Well, guys, before we lose you and before the Bob Ross channel kicks back on, be sure to join us. We'll be back on Tuesday of next week at 8 p.m. PST with James Pack
James Peck
Oh.
from Titanfall, War of the Apes, Planet of the Apes, all of those. A ridiculous amount of amazing films and games that he's worked on.
Definitely.
We will be here every Tuesday and Thursday between now and November 20th. We also stream very regularly on this Twitch channel. So if you want to get all the notifications for that, you can click the follow up there. It is a free, not subscribe. We are here to enable and inspire artists like yourselves to go out there and do anything that it is you want, whether you're a hobbyist or you're one of the tops of the game professionals. We're here to help you out and to be a teammate with you and have really fun, awesome events like this. So you can also find us on Instagram, KitBash3d, on Twitter, Face, all the spots there.
You can find Peter at Peter Hahn Style on Instagram, Twitter, all the above.
Yeah.
And check out his courses at Brainstorm CGMA Art Center.
CDA.
CDA.
Concept Design Academy. Several places.
Yeah. Follow him on
Yeah.
social, and you will
You'll
see
find
when
it there.
he's doing it.
And
Definitely.
huge thanks to Bobby Chu for being on the show with us. Please engage with him on social media. Give him a huge thank you from us if you do. Massive thanks to ArtStation for having us on the show. Also, thank you to Twitch for massive thanks to Twitch for having us on the show. Bob Ross Marathon. Thank you to ArtStation, our other sponsors, Blacklist Digital and Iron Will. Thank you, John and Tim's, for nailing it for us. Huge thank yous to all of you all. Without you guys being in the chat, without you guys showing up here and engaging with us on social media, we would not do this. But from your inspiration to us, and hopefully ours back to you, this is such a wonderful and great pleasure for us to be part of this with you.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Have an amazing evening, and we'll see you on Tuesday night.
Yeah, we'll take you out with the Mitch Myers opening title sequence.
Awesome.
Thank you.
See y'all.